Today I'm going to start building the Corralitos Polychrome double jar. This is the second to the last pot in the Ancient Pottery Challenge. So because I took a whole month off last month to visit my family in Montana, I'm a little behind. And so I'm anxious to get this pot kind of finished so I can get the last pot done and kind of get the Ancient Pottery Challenge wrapped up for this season. So here's the original artifact. This is held at the Arizona State Museum in Tucson, Arizona. And the original is about 11 inches long by about 5 inches high. And one thing you'll probably notice about this is that the body clay, the clay that the pot is formed from, is brown. Well, even though southern Arizona has a lot of brown clay, I don't have a lot of it on hand. The clays I generally use, my go-to clays, are gray and red. So I'm kind of mixing up. I'm custom mixing some clay here for this project because I'm hoping to get a good light tan color so that it'll match what we see on this Corralitos Polychrome pot. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing my usual red clay with some local brown clay from here in the Tucson area and a little bit of yellow clay that I have. The reasoning for this is that the brown clay that I have around here isn't very strong. It doesn't have much wet strength. So because this pot is kind of a complex form, it's a difficult shape to make. You know, you've got those two separate jars that are kind of attached. You do want to use a clay that has a lot of strength because you don't want those cracking or coming apart in any way once you have them formed. So I'm looking for a clay with a certain amount of strength. And that's why I'm adding that red and that yellow in there, because these clays have a lot more strength. And I'm hoping to kind of supplement the brown, make it a little stronger to get through this project. Once my clay has been mixed up and has had a chance to sit and age for a little while, I'm ready to start building this pot. So the first thing I make sure I have is two identical small size pookies, because essentially I'm making two identical small pots and then I'm connecting them. So I just start out like I usually do, making a little disc of clay and pressing it down into the pookie, pinching the sides up, using my gourd scraper to press it down into the pookie nice and smooth, and then trim it off even so I'm ready to lay my first coil. And now let me go over the basic steps for building a coil pot for those of you that are new here. The first step is coil, to roll a coil with your hand and then place it on the pot and bond. The second step is bond. That is using this bonding pinch, pressing down firmly into the body of the pot to connect the coil. Once the coil is adequately bonded to the pot, we can start pinching, and that just means pinching the walls thinner and higher. So I usually roll the coil about the thickness of my thumb, and then I pinch it up so I get more distance out of it than that. So pinching it down to about a 1/4 inch thickness. And that step is followed by scrape, using my gourd scraper to scrape the inside as well as the outside of the pot. And that's just going to smooth the walls of the pot so we're ready to start adding our next coil. And then I just repeat that process as many times as I need to build the pot the size I want. So coil, bond, pinch, scrape the outside, scrape the inside, repeat as necessary. So at this stage in forming a pot, I need to start bringing the walls in. I need to start decreasing the circumference of the opening. So in order to do that, I'm using the compression pinch, and that's just grabbing the walls of the pot gently and then pulling them together, creating little pleats in the clay. And that brings the walls in, as you can see here. So at this stage, I'm noticing a small problem, and that is right at the base, right where it meets the pookie. It kind of comes up out of the pookie and doesn't kind of form the right rounded shape on the bottom. So I went in and I got myself a wooden spoon, and I'm gently using that wooden spoon to press out that area right at the pookie line to kind of make sure that that pot has a nice rounded bottom. So now I'm ready to add my final coil on this pot, one of two of course, and I add the coil, I bond it, I pinch it up, and I realize it's too tall. The pot is too tall for the pot I'm trying to recreate. We can go back and look at the original and see they're rather squat little pots. So I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to trim off the top of this pot. There's a principle in editing video where they say murder your darlings. You've got to be willing to take those really great shots and cut them out. And in this case, the same principle applies towards pottery. You might really like the pot you've made. In this case, I really thought the shape of the pot was great and it looked really nice. But it didn't match the original. So you have to be willing to go in and kind of cut off something that actually looks good, or go back and take down and recreate something that you worked hard to build. And so, in finishing up the rim here, get it wet and smooth it out with a little piece of buckskin, I'm less than halfway done with this project. I'm done with pot number 1. I now have to build a second pot and connect them. So at this point you might be thinking to yourself, what's going on? This isn't where Andy usually makes pottery. Well, it's that time of year again. It's July, it's over 100 degrees outside, and my studio, my workshop where I make pottery usually, is nothing but a closed-in porch. And so when it's hot outside, it's hot in my studio. So I have moved into my office for the duration of the summer until it starts cooling down a little bit. Because projects like this, forming this pot took me most of a day. Now, I could go out there and work for a half hour at a time or something, but all day would take a lot out of me. So I'm in my office. The next step is going to be attaching the two pots together, which is really the hard part on this project. So I'm just trying to put them up next to each other and kind of trace out where I'm going to cut the holes. That way they line up. And then I'm using this needle tool to just kind of cut through the wall of the pot. So this little coil is what I'm going to use to attach the two. And I'm just going to attach it to one of the pots, make sure it's bonded really well, and then cut it out so that it fits up against the pot really good and secure. And then I'm just going to smush them together real good, and I'm going to work it from the outside and the inside to make sure that it's well attached. Now, my pot is a little bigger than the actual prehistoric pot. The prehistoric one is 11 inches, and mine is probably closer to 12. But it's really important that you be able to get your hand down inside of the pot to make sure that it's attached well on the inside as well as the outside. So if you make one of these, you need to keep in mind that the size of your pot has to be big enough to get your hand in. The person that made the original prehistoric pot was probably a woman who was considerably smaller than me. All right, I got the pot all formed. I'm going to let it dry and I'm going to wrap up for the day, and I'll come back tomorrow and continue working on it. At this point, my main concern is to make sure that it doesn't dry out too much overnight. So I want to make sure I wrap it up in plastic real good. The other thing is, as it dries a little bit and shrinks, that clay is going to shrink, I don't want it to pull itself apart. As these two halves are sitting on this towel, I want them to be able to pull close together, not, to crack, because they can't. So what I do is, just come in here and move it a little bit now and then, just to make sure that it can shrink good and it's not going to cause it to crack, because it can't move. So I should be able to get this wrapped up in the next day or two, and then of course let it dry and fire it. So I'll see you tomorrow. Corralitos Polychrome is a type that was made by the Casas Grandes culture, which is centered down in northern Chihuahua, Mexico, but comes up into the southwest a little bit in far southwestern New Mexico and far southeast Arizona. The interesting thing to me about the polychrome potteries made by the Casas Grandes culture is it's really hard to date them. Every single one of these polychrome types is generally given the date 1250 to 1450. There's no evolution here showing how one type became another. So it can be very confusing. So for example, if I go to a Salado site here in southeast Arizona, I can pick up a sherd and I can tell within a decade or two exactly when this sherd was made based on all that we know about these pottery types. So we can break down Salado pottery into different time periods when different types were made. But when it comes to Casas Grandes pottery, it all falls into this broad category of 1250 to 1450. So Corralitos Polychrome is very unique in that it has this incising and then painting in between. It really doesn't look like any other type from the Southwest. And because of that, some people have theorized that this type was based on some pottery that was made farther south in Mesoamerica, and that there were people, immigrants, that came up and brought their pottery traditions with them. And that's entirely possible, as it is with all of these Casas Grandes types. They're just very different from the other types that had been made previously in the surrounding area. I guess I still haven't started thinking like a successful YouTuber. The reason I say that is the night before this was filmed, I actually cracked the pot. I was moving it, as I showed you earlier, before I wrapped it up for the night, and the place where the two pots connect was really soft still. Even though it had been setting for a few hours, it was really soft, the clay. And so it cracked. It cracked pretty good. And so I spent quite a bit of time kind of sticking damp clay in the crack and smoothing it out, and I never once thought to turn on my camera to capture that, and I think, it would have been appropriate, but I just never thought of it until later. So here I am the next day, smoothing it out. So if you see me handling the pot a little more delicately today, it is because I cracked it pretty good yesterday. But I think I fixed it all right. So at this point, I'm doing stone smoothing. So that's just kind of smoothing the surface. I'm not polishing it. I'm just getting rid of any little divots and bumps and kind of making it all consistent and smooth. I will polish it later. Now, if you go back and look at the original pot, the lines at the top, these little vertical lines just below the rim, they're deeper than the other incising lines. They appear to have been done when the clay was wetter than the rest, and that's why I chose to put them on at this point. The rest of the incising I do quite a bit later. Let me talk briefly about neatness here. Now, I could have been much more precise in my incising lines, and especially in the way I applied the paint. But if you look at the original, those lines were applied rather sloppily. The black was maybe a little neater. The red was all over the place. And so what's important to me isn't to get the pot exactly precise in every detail like the original, but to capture the essence of the original. Listen to what Adam Savage recently said about this subject.
And there's some marvelous little irregularities in there that are super accurate to real armor and how real things get made. If there's one issue I have with replicas, it's often that they're too perfect.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
There's a lot more sort of handwork visible in the things.
So I think the neatness of the original, or the sloppiness of the original, needs to be captured. And so I applied the correct level of neatness to this pot to capture, hopefully, the feel of the original. I spent a lot of time looking at the original pot and thinking about in what order it was made. As far as I know, I've never known anybody to make a Corralitos Polychrome replica, so this may be the first, or at least the first I know of. So I don't have any precedence on the order of paint and incising, and so I'm kind of winging it here. So this is what I decided by looking at it. It looks like the painted areas, the red and black, are polished over, that they are polished smooth, and that the incising was done after the painting, in that none of the paint appears to clog up the incising lines. Now, the incising still has to be done when the pot is a little damp. So my theory was, put the paint on while it's still quite damp, let it set up enough that you can polish it, polish the painted areas as best I can, polishing just inside the painted area lines so that you don't smudge it or smear it, and then when it's at the right level of dryness, come back and do those incising lines. And so that's why I'm doing it in this strange order. At least it seems strange to me. It's different than what I've done in the past. After I get this all polished, then I can come back and start doing my incising lines. And I'm just using a dental tool here to cut those in. And like I said, given what the original looks like, I think those were put in when it was relatively hard, like it is here. A little firmer than those vertical lines at the rim. All right, today I'm cheating a little bit. I'm not firing in a completely authentic manner. The reason is the fire danger is really high, so I can't go out in the country and fire in an authentic way like I usually do. So I'm going to fire here in my yard using charcoal. It's like 107 degrees out here right now, so it's pretty hot. I kind of thought about it earlier in the day, and I thought, is it better to fire earlier in the day when the temperature's lower, or later in the day when I could have some shade on this side of the house? So I opted for later in the day with the shade. So I do have shade, as you can see, but the other end of that is it's 107 degrees. So I'm sweating pretty bad. It's pretty hot. So the idea is just put some charcoal in here, get it lit, and just let it burn down. If you don't know how this kind of firing goes on, I've got a video that explains it. I'll link that up down in the doobly-doo. All right, so let's get this fired and see how it comes out. To head off your questions, which I know you'll have, first of all, I preheated this pot for about an hour at 170 degrees Fahrenheit in my oven this morning, just to make sure that it was fully dry and drive off any remaining moisture. And secondly, I always get comments about galvanized tubs. Galvanized is made with zinc, and so when you fire that zinc, it oxidizes, it gives off fumes that can make you sick. Generally, if you're not sticking your head in the fire and breathing it in, you're going to be okay. I used to work as a welder, and I used to weld on things that were galvanized. And we'd just make sure there was a good breeze. Sometimes we'd turn on a fan or something if we were in a shop, and just make sure that those fumes are ventilated away. So in an outdoor space like this, you're really okay as long as you're not sticking your head in the smoke. All right, it's first thing the next morning, and we're gonna open this up and see how the pot did. Man, it was hard waiting last night, knowing that it was done. This was probably done firing by 8:30, 9 o'clock, but no way was I gonna open this up in the dark. I wanted to wait till this morning so I could film it and you could see the big reveal. So let's see how the pot's doing. I don't know if this is going to clean off or not. Oh, it's still pretty dang hot. It's got cracks in it too. I'm not sure why that zinc would affect this side of the pot and not the other. If it had to do with wind conditions or the flow of oxygen in here, I just don't know. Because the only place it is on this side. I guess I could refire it, and there's definitely something to be said for pre-cooking those galvanized tubs. And then I've got a crack on this side. Pretty substantial little crack, actually. And my brown came out more orange than I would have liked. But overall, it looks really good. It's way too orange to be the real thing. But the look is really nice. I love it. All right, overall, a fun little project. Made some mistakes along the way. Let's talk about those. If I did this again, I'd go out and get some definite browner clay. This ended up being way too orange for the type. Also, the way it was fired, I probably should have pre-cooked that galvanized tub. But both of those are responsible from the heat that we're going through right now. Like I said, it was 107 last night when I was firing. It's probably getting up towards 100 already this morning. I'm standing out here sweating. So really the heat has driven me to some of these decisions. If it wasn't for the heat and the dry weather, I'd have been firing outdoors and I wouldn't have had any problems with galvanized tubs. If it was cooler, I'd have gone out and gathered some brown clay, but I didn't want to go out, so I tried to use what I had in my studio. So there you go. The crack, I don't know what caused the crack, tell you the truth. It could be that it got too hot, but it just doesn't look overfired. So I don't know. I don't usually get cracks like this in my firing. So it could just be one of those things. At any rate, there is another one here on the handle. I'll have to look closely. There may be a few other little cracks here and there. It could be related to the way I fired it. I just don't know. If this was your pot and you were asking me for advice, I'd say refire this. Refire it and burn that out. What happens when you cook those galvanized tubs the first time is they're oxidizing all that zinc, and you can get some of this. So I would maybe cook the zinc tub one more time all by itself to make sure you get all the junk off of it, and then I'd refire it if it was yours and I was telling you what to do. As it is with me, you know, I'll display it like this. It'll sit on a shelf and it'll look nice. So there we have it. Really though, of all the Ancient Pottery Challenge pots that I've made this year, the one that came out the best was this Hohokam jar. So if you want to see how I built this from start to finish, check out this video right over here where I go into that whole process. Thanks for watching today. I'll catch you next time.